If you merited knowledge, you were given it. Otherwise, you were not given this knowledge. You were kept in the dark. So, this was also another thing that was happening. Now, these teachers, that's why the traditional masters of the past, they preferred that some teachings die rather than teach somebody who was not worthy of learning. This was their strong view. So if you take this point as well as the point which I said earlier about the British bringing in new systems of healing or learning which was much more freely accessible, you can imagine that there was a dark phase that was going on in the late 19th century. This was the time when somebody like Krishnamacharya was born in a very dark era. In a very dark era where many of the traditional knowledge systems were slowly and progressively disappearing in popularity as well as in practice. So, this was the field in which such a seed was planted. And considering the history of his family, there was a great responsibility right from a very young age that somebody like him would be, or somebody in that family would take up the responsibility for continue or revive this kind of a teaching into the future. This needed a lot of effort. So very early on, Krishnamacharya lost his father and had to be educated by his uncle and grandfather, who were all involved in a very traditional family system of education. However, as he grew into a young boy, he knew very well that there was something else that was resting with him, an important responsibility. So, around the age of 16, he started searching for teachers. He started moving to North India to a very famous place called Varanasi, and then also Calcutta, which were great centers of learning, and tried to master many of these Indian philosophies so that would help him. So after this kind of studies, which included some kind of study on yoga, Ayurveda, Vedanta and all these philosophies, he heard from one of his Yoga Sutra lecturers, a man called Desikachar, that there was a teacher in the Himalayas who could perhaps be helping him even further, because I think this master, this scholar Desikachar, knew the history or the family history of Krishnamacharya and wanted to support him into this direction. So when this happened, there was a journey, a new journey that was begun. So Krishnamacharya went in search of this teacher, and again it's a little challenging story which perhaps some of you already know. He went there and stayed about 8.5 years in a very intimate setting where there was nothing but a cave to learn, and he was staying with his teacher in this time. This was his primary learning of yoga from his teacher, and around the early 1920s, 1918 or so, he was told by his teacher, now you can go back, start teaching people yoga and raise a family. So by this time, it was very clear for Krishnamacharya that he had this responsibility of somehow reviving yoga or somehow reviving some of the old traditions into the future generations, because this would just die. You must understand, in those days, certainly in those days, a wish from a teacher of a student was taken as the final word. So when the teacher said you must go and share yoga so that it is useful for people, that was like a, I would say, like a command that you can't refuse. It's like, it's like nowadays we have in modern science, we have modern times, the equivalent would be something like the Godfather saying, you make an offer you can't refuse. Something like that. It's like the teacher telling this student, look, this is what I want you to do. There's no discussion or argument, that's it. It is the final thing. And in those days it was working, because this was the kind of fees that the student was paying the teacher. It was not based on money, it was based on something to be fulfilled. So this is the time when Krishnamacharya came back from the Himalayas after about 8 years. Now imagine the shock he must have had, because 8 years he is not in contact with society and how it's evolving. And if you look at the history of India, you know, a lot of things changed in these times very quickly, because you know, the British have a good history of destruction. So they destroyed quite a few things very shortly, and Krishnamacharya came and found that most of the people had no clue what yoga was, or no clue what these great teachings were. So he had this, it was like he had a piece of gold, but people could not see it was gold or something, so he had to show them that this was gold. But one thing he did before he started doing this was, he said, well, I have a big responsibility, so I need to prepare some more. One of the things about Indian philosophy is, if you want to understand one, you need to understand all. Because there are so many things which are connected in these different philosophies, that what is said here has a connection to what is said in another one, what is said there is got a connection to another. So there is a, what is called an interrelationship between the philosophies. But there is also another reason why he wanted to study all this, because in those days there was the rise of another philosophy called Vedanta, religious philosophy, because people were very fascinated about this, and I think this is also something which plays a role in his work a little later in his life. So he started to go back to university in Varanasi to get some more degrees to equip himself for the preparation of his future responsibilities. But then how to start? How to start communicating with people that there is value to yoga and make them inspired. Now imagine yourself in a situation where people are not interested, people are not aware of what things is going on, and there is resistance from an alien culture which is pushing its ideas. What would you do technically? You have to do some marketing. Right? Very simple. You have to do some marketing. And what is the marketing tools that was available in those days? A very poor man who just came back from studying with teachers, great teachers. He had no money, but he had something else, which was himself. So this is how he started to open the doors of yoga to the next generation, or the coming generation of people. He had to start showing people what are the values of yoga, rather than speak about it. Because I think when people see something, it's much more convincing than when people speak about something. So this is how he started to open the doors of yoga to the next generation of people, which is how he presented yoga in the early 1920s. In his early part of his life, his teaching was very much to demonstrate to people the power of yoga, and the power of yoga over the mastery of the body. That's why he called this era what is called Vajrakaya. Vajrakaya means body is kaya, Vajra means diamond. The body is like a diamond, it shines like a diamond. How? Through mastery of the body. Now, another great phenomena of his teaching has been that there's always references to classical texts where there is authenticity in whatever teachings he had to share. See, today we are in a generation where anybody can mix anything and call it yoga and just get away with it, because there is not yet a yoga police. So you can mix dogs and yoga and call it yoga. You can mix smoking and yoga, call it smoga. Today everything is possible. Today everything is possible. But in those days it was not so easy, because you needed references, solid references, it needed to be authentic.